Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is to take a significant text, unfold its history, its context, and its profound truth, giving you a shortcut to genuine, well-informed insight.
And today, we are doing a deep dive into what might be the most famous story Jesus ever told.
That's right, the parable of the prodigal son from Luke chapter 15, verses 11 through 32.
You know, it's a story so many of us think we know, but it's really far more than just a moral tale about a wayward young man.
How so?
Well, it's a brilliant self-portrait of God. It's like
Yeah.
a window into the Father's heart, into the Son's mission, and even into the Spirit's work of drawing people home. It's a story that's designed to expose, really, the state of every human heart.
And the context for the story is
Yeah.
it's absolutely vital. Luke doesn't just drop this story in out of nowhere.
No, not at all.
He sets the scene right at the beginning of chapter 15. Jesus is doing something that, to the religious leaders, is highly controversial. He is welcoming, and this is the key part, eating with tax collectors and sinners.
And we have to understand who these people were. They were the outcasts, the people considered morally and ceremonially unclean by the religious elite.
Right, so this is where the conflict starts to bubble up. The spiritual leaders, the Pharisees, and the teachers of law, they're not happy about this at all.
No, they start grumbling. You can almost hear the sneer in their voice when they say, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them."
They're really questioning his holiness, aren't they? His credentials as a teacher of God's law.
Absolutely. So Jesus is facing a direct critique. He's dealing with a kind of spiritual snobbery.
But instead of launching into some complex theological debate, he responds with stories. 3 simple stories about something being lost and then found.
It's an amazing strategy. First, the lost sheep, then the lost coin, and finally this masterpiece, the story of the 2 sons. And each one ends with this explosion of joy.
He's basically asking, if a shepherd rejoices over one lost sheep, shouldn't God rejoice when one of his children is restored?
Exactly. And this story is the climax. It's the ultimate illustration of that joy. And it really sets the stage for what we're calling the famine of sin and the feast of grace.
So our goal for you, as you listen, isn't just to hear a familiar story. It's to really grasp the deep and sometimes, frankly, scandalous implications of this text.
Yeah, we want to see what it reveals about God, but also how it exposes our own hearts, whether we identify more with the reckless rebel or maybe the resentful rule keeper.
That's the challenge, isn't it? The parable is a mirror.
It is. And to feel its full impact, we really need to start by stepping back into first-century Palestine. We have to understand the cultural earthquake this story represented to its very first audience.
Okay, let's do that. Let's unpack the historical and cultural background. And we have to start with that moment in verse 12. The younger son makes his demand. He asks his father to give him his share of the inheritance right now.
And this is where the shock value just begins immediately. I mean, we read this through our modern lens of, individualism and maybe financial impatience.
Sure, a kid wants to leave home and start his life.
Right. But in that culture, this request was an act of profound public aggression. It wasn't just greedy. It was treasonous to the family.
Why so aggressive? I mean, if the inheritance was legally his eventually,
Yeah.
what was so bad about asking for it early?
Because the family's estate, the land, the resources, that was the bedrock of their identity. It was their honor, their survival.
It wasn't just a financial portfolio.
Not at all. To demand your share before your father's death was, functionally, to treat him as if he were dead. You were essentially saying, "Dad, I wish you were gone so I could have your stuff and leave."
Wow. So it's a profound public insult. A total rejection of the father's authority, his life, everything he stands for.
In a village culture that was defined by honor and shame, where your reputation was everything, this was catastrophic, not just for the son, but for the father's name, the whole family.
He has publicly shamed the family. He's taken the family identity, which is tied up in the land, and said, I want to liquidate my portion of it.
And you can be sure the entire village was watching this drama unfold. They'd be marking this father as a man whose own son held him in complete contempt.
Which brings us to the first major shock of the parable, the father's response. A normal patriarch, by the cultural rules, should have refused. He should have disciplined the son, maybe even publicly shamed him to restore the family honor.
But he doesn't. The father does the absolute unthinkable. He divides his property.
He agreed.
He absorbs the dishonor. He agrees to the loss, both the financial loss and, more importantly, the loss of face, the reputational loss all, for the sake of, well, it seems like a desperate hope for connection.
It's completely countercultural. A typical patriarch would have protected the family honor above all else. This father sacrifices his own honor.
And in doing that, the father immediately paints a picture of God that would have just stunned the audience.
Right.
A God who is patient, kind, willing to endure a devastating wrong for the sake of his children.
It's that picture from the Psalms, isn't it? Merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love.
Yes, exactly. The father acts with this radical, preemptive kindness. He gives the son the freedom he demanded, even though he must have known what disaster was likely waiting down the road.
And that takes us right to the son's journey and his fall. He goes to a distant land, far away from all the rules and expectations, and he wastes his wealth in what the text just bluntly calls reckless living.
That phrase, distant land, is so key. It's not just a geographical move, it's a spiritual one. He's walking away from the structure, the safety, the love of his father's house.
He's looking for radical freedom, but what he finds is radical degradation. This wasn't just, a few bad investments. Reckless living implies a life of total dissipation.
Right. And the imagery Jesus uses to describe the consequences is just so deliberate and, for a Jewish audience, incredibly visceral.
His fall is so fast. First, the money runs out. Then a severe famine hits the land, and his desperation forces him into a job that, for a Jew, was the absolute lowest point.
Feeding.
Let's pause on that for a second because the weight of that detail is huge. Why was feeding pigs the absolute worst job imaginable?
Well, the pig was classified as deeply unclean in the Mosaic law. To even handle them meant you were immediately ritually defiled.
So for a Jewish man to be reduced to this in a foreign land, starving, it meant he had completely forfeited his heritage, his identity.
He was lower than the lowest Gentile laborer. He was doing the unthinkable. He had traded the Father's house, a place of identity, of abundance, for a state of utter slavery, hunger, and shame.
It's just a powerful confirmation of that timeless biblical warning, isn't it? The path away from God promises freedom, but it always leads to slavery, to an emptiness.
A hunger that nothing in that distant land can fill. He gets so desperate he's longing to eat the pods that the pigs are eating. That just underscores the depth of his fall.
And that desperation, that hunger, it brings us to the hinge point of the whole story. The text says he comes to his senses.
And notice what that means. It's not some sudden surge of spiritual fervor. It's clarity, driven by cold, hard reality.
He remembers. He remembers that even the hired workers back in his father's house have bread to spare, while he's literally starving to death.
Misery drives him to memory. And memory drives him to a decision.
That hunger is so essential to the story. It's a symbol of the soul's deep dissatisfaction when we try to live independently from God.
Yeah.
So, okay, this brings us to the father's next countercultural act, the reconciliation. And this, I think, is even more shocking than him dividing the property in the first place.
It really is.
The son starts the long journey home. He's dirty. He's broke. He probably smells of pigs. And what does the father do?
He runs. We have to just stop and let the weight of that single word sink in for you.
I mean, picture the scene. A dignified, older patriarch, probably wearing long robes appropriate for his status.
A man like that would never have lifted his garment and sprinted down the road in front of the whole village. It was completely beneath his dignity. It was an act of self-shame.
So why does he do it? Why the rush? Why not just wait, composedly at the gate for his son to arrive?
Because the father knows the culture. A son returning in rags, having wasted his inheritance, would have faced intense public scorn.
The village would have come out to shame him.
Oh, absolutely. There was even a Jewish ceremony called the kizaza, the cutting off. The community would break a pot in front of the return as a sign of public disownment.
A public shaming ceremony.
Yes. So the father runs to intercept his son. He runs to absorb the shame of the return before the son can be publicly condemned by the neighbors.
So that physical act, the running, the embrace, the kiss, it's a public declaration. It's designed to neutralize the village's power to condemn.
He's shouting to the world, "This is still my son, and his shame ends right now because I am taking it." It just shows the deep, compassionate heart of God.
And then comes the restoration, which is just as dramatic. It's immediate. It's non-negotiable. There's no probation period.
No list of chores to earn his way back.
None of that.
Yeah.
In fact, the father interrupts the son's prepared speech and calls for 4 things: the best robe, the ring, the sandals, and the feast.
Let's look at those tokens of restoration because they say so much about the nature of the Father's grace.
Okay, first the robe.
The best robe. This is the outward sign of honor. It replaces the rags of degradation, the smell of the pigsty. It covers his past shame and instantly reinstates his dignity in front of everyone.
Okay. And second, The ring.
The ring would have likely been a signet ring, used to stamp documents, to seal transactions. Giving the son the ring signifies authority, full trust.
So he's not just a family member again, he's a trusted agent of the family.
Exactly. It means he has access to the family resources again. His empty hands now hold the symbol of the estate's command.
And then the sandals. This detail seems small, but it's maybe the most pointed of all.
It is, because slaves and servants in that culture typically went barefoot. Sons wore shoes or sandals.
So by providing sandals, the father is making a definitive public statement.
He's saying, for the benefit of every watching neighbor, this boy is not returning as a hired servant, which is what the son was about to beg for. He is my son.
So these aren't just gifts. They are signs of full restoration to sonship, an immediate move from death to life, from being a slave to being an heir.
And then the feast, the fattened calf. This wasn't for a regular Tuesday night dinner. This was reserved for rare, community-wide, celebratory occasions.
It signals that grace is never a private, quiet little thing.
No, it demands a communal celebration. The father's joy just spills out, and it invites everyone in to share it, asking the whole community to acknowledge that something monumental, something joyous has happened.
Which connects this story right back to the big theme of Luke 15, the joy in heaven over one sinner who repents.
Exactly. But just as the music and the dancing start, the camera, so to speak, pivots. And we meet the second major character whose heart is about to be exposed, the older son.
Right. The older son comes in from the field, he hears the music, asks the servant what's going on, and when he hears the news, he is furious. He refuses to go inside.
And we learn that as the elder, he already had full access to everything his father owned. But his refusal to enter the public celebration, that's a profound dishonor to his father in a different, quieter, but equally devastating way.
That is such a critical insight. The younger son dishonored the father by leaving the house.
But the older son dishonors him by rejecting his mercy.
The younger son's sin was recklessness. The older son's sin is this resentful self-righteousness.
He embodies the very grumblers Jesus was addressing in the first place. The Pharisees, the guardians of propriety, who find grace scandalous because they prefer a universe governed by merit, not mercy.
And when he finally does speak, his words are just dripping with contempt. He doesn't call him his brother. He says, "This son of yours."
He's disowning him. He's using his words to distance himself from the family while at the same time trying to leverage his own perceived good behavior.
He says, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders."
And that phrase, slaving for you, that is the key to his whole heart. Even though he was physically present in the father's house, his heart was in a distant land.
He saw his work as forced labor, a transaction, a way to earn favor and get what he was owed.
Not the loving service of a son who already possessed everything. He was a slave to his own duty and merit, and he resented that his brother got a feast just for being found.
So he was living like a servant in his own home, constantly keeping score, tallying up his merits, and completely missing the gift of his father's love and presence.
Precisely. His anger boils over because mercy, to him, it undermines the value of his own obedience. If grace is given away for free, then what are his years of hard work worth? His resentment just reveals his pride.
And it is so striking that the father goes out to both sons.
Mm-hmm.
He ran down the road to meet the rebel with urgent compassion. Now he comes out into the yard to meet the resentful son with patient pleading.
He honors the older son by leaving the party to address his complaint. He says, "My son, you are always with me and everything I have is yours."
He's basically saying, "You've always had access to my love, my resources, my joy. Why are you acting like a hired hand who has nothing?"
The father is trying to draw him out of his cold anger and into the celebration. He's gently confronting the fact that the older son's heart is the one that's truly lost, even though his body never left home.
And the father's final justification for the party is firm. It's non-negotiable. He says, "It was necessary to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found."
The father defines the terms. This is a resurrection. You can't be calm or measured when the dead come back to life. It had to be celebrated.
And that leads us to the brilliant, challenging, open ending of the whole parable.
Yes. The curtain just falls. The older brother is still standing outside. We don't know if he goes in.
Jesus leaves the decision right in the hands of the audience, the Pharisees, the grumblers, and every one of us listening today, to decide for ourselves if we're going to enter and share the Father's joy.
That ambiguity is so intentional. It forces you to choose grace or self-justification, and that really sets the stage for us to move into the theological significance of this story, beyond just the family drama.
So when we look at this story, not just as history, but as theology, that image of the Father running becomes one of the greatest statements about God's compassionate nature we could ever receive.
He really is the center of compassion. His love is steadfast, his joy fills the house, and it's all directed towards sinners who turn back to him.
And the first theological lesson here seems to be about the nature of genuine repentance, which we see in the younger son.
Yes. His journey back isn't about working his way up the road, proving himself. It's about speaking the truth before God. His prepared confession is so simple. I have sinned against heaven and against you.
It's the language of truth. There are no excuses. He's turning from his own ruin toward mercy, and he's confident that the Father's goodness is greater than his own guilt.
He's relying completely on the Father's character, not his own ability to get a job as a servant. He confesses his own destruction and just hopes for a character better than he deserves.
And the Father's response to that confession dramatizes one of the core doctrines of our faith, justification by grace.
The Father doesn't just forgive. He restores status, immediately and fully. The robe, the ring, the sandals, they are symbols of a complete, non-negotiable gift.
Let's spend a moment on that word justification, because I think it's often misunderstood as simply, being forgiven.
It's so much more than that. Justification means God declares us righteous. He grants us full standing, a right relationship, not based on our performance, but entirely on his grace.
So the Father doesn't just offer the Son a place to stay for a while.
No, he grants him full sonship. The robe covers the rags. The ring seals his authority. He's instantly moved from having a legal problem, his sin, to a relational reality, being a son. It's full restoration.
And the fact that this all leads to a shared public feast. It shows us that our restoration in God is never meant to be just a private internal feeling.
Exactly. It's meant to be a visible, communal event that draws others into the Father's joy, which brings the older son right back into sharp focus as a major theological warning.
He illustrates the danger of proximity without intimacy, being physically near God's house, but being internally a million miles away.
He kept all the rules, but he missed the love. He served for merit, not out of gratitude. He was treating the whole relationship like a contract.
I do X, therefore you owe me Y.
Yes, and that is the very mindset Jesus was confronting in the grumbling Pharisees. And this is so vital. The parable redefines God's holiness.
How so?
God's holiness isn't threatened by mercy, it's displayed by mercy. It's displayed by a holiness that radically restores the broken and rejoices over their return.
So true service should flow from gratitude for what we already have, not from a desperate attempt to earn what we already possess.
And that's why it's so profound that the Father goes out to both sons. The rebel who needed compassion and the resentful son who needed correction. Grace is an absolute equalizer.
It exposes pride just as surely as it forgives sin.
Yes, because it calls both the rule breaker and the rule keeper to abandon their own self-justification and come into the very same feast.
Which raises the ultimate theological question. What is the cost of all this? What's the cost of this generous welcome?
While the parable itself focuses on the Father's immediate welcome, we have to connect it to the central work of the gospel to understand the full significance.
The feast in the story cost the Father a fattened calf, which was a valuable commodity. But in the gospel, we understand the Father bore the ultimate cost himself.
In the death of his Son, Jesus is the one who took the road to the distant country, not to waste wealth, but to bear our sin, so that we could receive the robe of righteousness, the seal of the Spirit, and a seat at the table.
It connects all the way back to the Old Testament necessity of a sacrifice for atonement, the Father's embrace and kiss. It points directly to the cross, doesn't it, where justice and mercy meet.
Where righteousness and peace kiss each other because the cost of our sin was fully absorbed by the Son. The Father's joy isn't just a nice feeling. It's a holy delight in restored fellowship, a joy that Jesus himself shares as the Good Shepherd who lays down his life.
And this also has huge implications for the original historical context of Israel. Jesus is speaking directly to the shepherds of Israel, the religious leaders, and confronting them for failing to reflect God's heart for the lost.
Oh, absolutely. By welcoming the tax collectors and sinners, Jesus is identifying himself as the true shepherd of Israel, the one who came specifically to seek and save the lost. The parable is a challenge to them. God is celebrating with the very people you condemn.
And the sources remind us that the religious elite symbolized by that older brother, largely refused the invitation to come into the feast. They chose self-righteous separation instead.
They did. But Scripture is also clear that the promise of a future renewal for a humbled Israel remains. Even as grace gathers people from every nation into the Father's house, the eventual turning of Israel is a scriptural certainty.
That global scope brings us perfectly to the practical application of this profound story for our lives today, because it offers instruction and comfort and warning, really, depending on where we find ourselves.
The first application is for the wandering heart. For the person listening who may feel like they've journeyed far away from faith or morality or security, and they're in that place of famine right now.
The prodigal son shows us the pathway home.
And that pathway doesn't start with trying to fix yourself. It starts with just utter honesty. The call to come home begins with those simple words, I have sinned against heaven and against you.
Acknowledging our state is the first act of wisdom. God always honors words that come from a broken and contrite spirit.
And here's the crucial practical reassurance. And this fights against the older brother's mindset. There is absolutely no need to bargain for a spot in the servants' quarters.
The son planned to ask for less than his true status, didn't he? But the father interrupted him and gave him everything.
That is such a deep encouragement for anyone listening who feels like you have to clean up your act before you can approach God. The Father clothes his penitent children in honor and seals their belonging with the Spirit the moment they turn.
You don't have to prove yourself worthy. You just have to turn back toward those waiting arms.
And the second application is just as vital, but it's for those of us who have, stayed home, the people active in service who might feel like we've earned our place, or who resent the ease of someone else's forgiveness.
It's an invitation to check our own hearts.
Deeply. The older brother shows us it's entirely possible to stand on duty for years and still miss the core joy of the relationship. It's possible to measure your life by the sacrifices you've made, the goats denied, while completely missing the immeasurable gift of the Father's presence.
We have to ask ourselves, am I serving out of grateful love or out of a spirit of contractual slaving?
And if someone who has sinned differently than I have is welcomed back, is my first reaction joy, or is it that bitter resentment over unearned grace?
The Father's actions are so challenging here. He opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. He comes out and pleads with that older brother heart to abandon its pride and enter the celebration.
And this has powerful implications for us as a community of faith. Churches that truly mirror the Father have to welcome sinners with both truth and tender restoration. We can never resent the Father's mercy toward others, no matter how messy their sin seems.
The third application is about the ongoing life of grace. For everyone who's already at the Father's table, the journey doesn't end when the feast begins. It just changes how we walk.
Confession has to remain a way of life. We keep short accounts with God, not because we're afraid of losing our place at the table if we mess up,
but because we want to keep that fellowship bright and honest. We trust that the Father is faithful to forgive and cleanse us precisely because our position is secured by the robe he gave us, not by our own performance.
And that ongoing life has to be fueled by gratitude. The energy we need to have patience and show mercy to others has to come from constantly remembering the famine we left and the undeserved robe we were given.
We were all once dead, and now we are alive by grace.
That gratitude compels us to be merciful to others who are stumbling home behind us. And finally, the joy of the Lord, experienced in that restored fellowship, it becomes our actual strength for patient endurance. We can be confident that the same Father who ran to meet us will finish what he began in us.
And the whole story just hinges on that powerful, open ending, compelling a decision from every single one of us.
It forces the ultimate question on you. Will you stay outside, muttering about fairness, convinced you've earned something the Father is giving away freely?
Or will you recognize the deep truth that resurrection and restoration are never small things? They're always occasions for unbounded joy, and heaven's joy has to become our family custom.
And when a community of faith lives with that kind of open, celebratory joy, mirroring the Father who runs, it becomes the most compelling signpost in a hungry world. It shows people who are far off that there is peace, and there is a guaranteed seat at a table set entirely by grace.
I mean, what's so fascinating is that Jesus tells the story of two types of human hearts and one compassionate Father, and he does it so that no one can mistake what God is truly like.
He's not cautious with mercy. He's quick to see, quick to run, lavish in his welcome, and firm in his truth, drawing both the reckless rebels and the resentful moralizers into one unifying feast of grace.
So whether you see yourself in that far country today, desperately hungry for home, or maybe standing resentfully in the front yard, convinced you've earned something better than grace, the invitation stands. Come in and share his joy.
The door is open because the Son came to seek and to save the lost and to bring many sons and daughters to glory.
We want to close by returning to that central image of the entire parable, the moment it all hinges on. From Luke 15, verse 20, it's a promise we can all hold on to.
But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him.
That single verse just highlights the immediate, personal, and costly nature of the Father's compassion. It emphasizes his initiative. He runs, he embraces, he kisses, all before we can even finish proving ourselves worthy.
It is his commitment to us that defines the relationship, not our ability to earn our way back.
So we encourage you today to receive the profound running compassion of the Father, to enter or to remain in his joy, and to share that boundless joy with others who are finding their way home.
May you know the depths of the Father's unreserved welcome today.